Hey Antwan, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Good, good, good. I'm so glad to have you back. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with the Speaker Podcast. But before I do that, I definitely want to welcome everyone. Hey, everybody, this is Camille Essick. I am host of the Speaker Podcast. This is the podcast for innovators and creators. Be sure to hit that notification bell, subscribe, and follow me on Facebook. We're also on YouTube. Also, the Speaker Podcast, we now have a premium option available. And with that, you can get exclusive episodes starting at $3 a month. And if you haven't liked, shared, or comment, please do so. This is a conversation you don't want to miss. My brother and friend, I'm so excited to have this gentleman back just because every time I talk to him, it's just an enlightening conversation. He brings so much value and so much to the table, so I had to bring him on. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, you're about to find out the one and only Antwan Aiken. Hey, Antwan, welcome back to the show.
Yes, I'm happy to be back. It feels like it's been so long.
I know it has been a minute, but I did not want to go into this quarter and not have you come through and sit in the living room with us. So, how have you been? What's going on? What's new? I know you are franchising the franchise king in the ATL.
Just trying to make this restaurant work.
Hey, and you know what? I need to fall through. I need to pull up. Um, I keep forgetting y'all out tomorrow. It's a little further on down the highway, but I need to pull on through because the food you post and breakfast is my favorite out of the three meals. Breakfast, I can eat breakfast anytime. So I definitely need to stop on by and support. So you're not allowed to support my people. So
Breakfast, brunch, and lunch.
what are your hours?
6 to 2. So we're an early morning concept.
Oh, I got to get up. Okay.
You gotta get up.
We're gonna work it out. We're gonna work it out. So before we hop into that, let's plug it right quick. What is the name of the spot? Where is it located? Tell us a little bit about it.
So it's Eggs Up Grill. Eggs Up Grill is our restaurant, which is a franchise located in Morrow, Georgia. We serve breakfast, brunch, and lunch daily from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. So we are about everything pancakes, eggs, bacon, sausage, biscuit, all of that. But we also have a brunch and lunch menu. So we sell burgers, salads, wraps, melts. So not just breakfast. If breakfast isn't your thing and you want more of a lunch vibe, we have a lunch menu as well.
See, I'm a French toast girl. So do y'all have French
That
toast?
too. Oh yeah, for sure, of
Okay, I
course.
love my French toast with my turkey sausage or my chicken sausage and my eggs and cheese. I'm a happy child. Um, you feed me. I'm like a cat. I'm gonna come back.
Look, we like customers like you.
Yes, yes. So for those who are not familiar with you, give us a little bit about your background. I know you're teaching. Are you still teaching this semester?
I am. I love
Okay.
teaching. So I'm an adjunct professor at Kennesaw State University, but professionally, I'm a licensed psychotherapist. So all things mental health is my bread and butter. I enjoy talking about mental health because I think it's one of those things that we pathologize. Like we hear the word mental health, and we all have different ideas of what that means. So I love breaking that topic down.
That is so good. And the reason why I wanted to have you on tonight is just because I was listening or reading to something and they were talking about statistically little black girls are not hugged as much or less giving less affection and verbally affirm saying you're pretty, I love you versus their white counterparts. So then I thought about how that would impact our little black boys. And that's why I wanted to have you on have this conversation. So let's kind of start into that as far as those that are not familiar with touch deprivation Antoine, can you kind of unpack that for the listeners and viewers?
So, touch deprivation, when you think about it, the term in and of itself really kind of lets you know what it's talking about. It's literally just being deprived of that sense of touch. So, when we think about our five senses, we think about hearing, we think about seeing, we think about touch, and we think about smell. When we think about those senses, all of those senses work in unison. You really need one in order for the other one to be effective. When we talk about touch deprivation, it's the same thing. We are emotional beings. I always say, and people that hear me say this always laugh when I say it, I'm a human, not a tree. I'm not just something that you can water every few days and walk away from and expect it to just thrive and grow. I have to be nurtured, I have to be cultivated, I have to have all of these things that really help me to grow and be prosperous. And I think that touch is one of those things. So when we think about touch deprivation, it's the lack of physical touch, which is something that's very important.
So, in going into that, I think about, at least on the side with the little girls, you're the saying that if you don't get it at home, you're going to find it somewhere else. So, as we go into our teen years, what does that look like for our young boys?
I think it's even, I mean, when you just shared that statistic about young black girls, it was something that I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But then I started thinking that it's probably even worse for young black males, just
Mhm.
because when you think about in our culture, and when I say our, I'm talking about my culture, being in a black
Yes,
community, when we think about touch, we don't always associate touch with being a positive thing. We
right.
sometimes associate touch with being a negative thing. When we think about, give me 10 feet, don't come in my personal space. Those are things that we kind of see touch as being a very negative thing. And I think that that can create this desensitization to touch to where you don't want to touch, you don't really see the need to be touched because
Mhm.
it's always been seen as a negative thing.
I think also too, hearing you say that when you go into relationships, if you're not accustomed to being held or hugged, it can be an issue when it terms just in simple intimacy, nothing even sexual, but just problems, giving a hug, getting a hug, or um, spaces where the person you're in a relationship with, they're saying, "Why don't you ever hug me? Why don't you ever do this?" And then you like, "Oh, they're nagging me," but it really could tie deeper into not even accustomed to functioning in that space. Even like, communication can be verbal and nonverbal. So that nonverbal communication for the other person can mirror rejection, right?
Yeah, I totally think so. I mean, I think a lot of us, and I'm certainly just kind of self disclosing with myself, grew up in household environments where what is said, what's understood doesn't necessarily have to be said, and that can translate to touch. So I don't necessarily need for my parent to hug me every day to know that they love me. I just kind of know that they love me. They may not say it, they may not touch me, but I'm just supposed to know that that love is there and that support is there. And we really transfer that to our adulthood, where we kind of go through adulthood thinking that we don't need touch because we've never really experienced it. Or for those of us that have any kind of like sexual violence in our background or any sexual assault, touch is seen as one of those things that's not really appreciated and not one of those things that's valued.
That's really good. I also I think about the other end of that coin, right? Then there's overcompensation because you did not get that as a child. So then you try to kind of heal your inner child or give yourself what you wanted or needed by being overly affectionate, or some people may label it as being needy. Always want to be held, always want to be cuddled, always told I love you, always. So what do you think about the other end of that as well, Antoine?
I think that wanting to be held and wanting to be touched, I think is a positive thing. I think that
Mm,
we sometimes make it a negative thing. And I think that one of the reasons why, when we think about touch, particularly when we think about Black males, I think that there's a lot of toxic masculinity that really comes into play with that. So there's this idea that if you enjoy being held, that you're soft or that you're not as much of a man because touch may be my love language. I may enjoy being held, or I may enjoy cuddling, or I may enjoy some of these things that on the grand scheme of things in our community, it's not always perceived as being a positive thing, or it's not perceived as being the most masculine behavior to engage in. But then the other side of that is that when we think about what kind of our culture and some hip hop culture, how touch is then promoted, is that you do kind of the opposite. So you don't touch in a way that is soft and sensitive, but when you do touch, it needs to be aggressive. It needs to be hard. It needs to flex your masculinity. It needs to flex how strong you are. And that's when we see kind of that dichotomy where you go from not wanting to touch at all to when you do touch, that touch has to be something that's out of aggression or out of anger.
That's good. Also, when you were talking, it made me think about how that messaging also ties into black men crying because it's like, oh, if you cry, you're soft, then you want to attack the orientation. It's not the case. It's for women, we're allowed, particularly in our community, black women, we have so many spaces to communicate our feelings, whether it's in the beauty shop or at church or, we're going to brunch and girls trip. There's always a space for us to communicate. But for men, it's, suck it up, boys don't, you hear, boys don't cry. We hear all these things, but there's a stress that's building. And I think for me, it just my opinion, I feel like for men, for black men, it's so much of a label as far as the gender, but what about the humanity of the black man?
Yeah, I think that I mean when we think about what humanity means and when we think about that in the context of how we operate society, how we show up in society, how we're viewed in society, that humanity can look very different because
Mhm.
there hasn't always been a space where humility was given to us. So we in turn don't give it to other people, and then we just in a space where there is no humanity or where humanity can feel real inhumane at times. So I definitely think that there isn't always a safe space that either us, and when I say us, me as a black male, there's not always a safe space that we create, but there's also
Mhm.
not a safe space that oftentimes has been created for us to really comfortably be able to express stress, trauma, all of these things that impact everybody. Because again, we are human, we're not a tree, we feel, but there's not always a space for us to express that.
I think that's a really good point, and that's one of the reasons why I extended my platform. Because initially, when I started the Speaker Podcast, it was primarily for Black women, but then I did a mini series. It was called The King and I. I think it was like season 3 of the podcast, and I opened the door for the month of June just to talk to our brothers, and I got positive feedback, and I was like, hey, they need a space too, and so I just open that demographic and that platform so you all can have a safe, comfortable area in the digital platform to talk as well. So I know there's other we call the red pill, blue pill communities, but I want this space, the speaker podcast, to be more of a safety zone. I call it the honeycomb hideout, where we can all talk together and explore some ideas and do so in a way that's safe for both of us. So, yeah, and you're one of those people that I like to bring in just to open up the conversation and have the viewers and listeners kind of think about some things because we really haven't heard terms like touch deprivation before. We don't hear a lot of communication or conversations about that. So that's something I like to explore here. So going deeper into this conversation, Antoine, when we're talking about the humanity, not the gender of just being a black man, but the humanity when you're dealing with another phrase we brought up in the last season, performance exhaustion, because there's an expectation to perform, to excel, to achieve, and there's this pressure, and then you have a burnout, but then again, you can't cry, can't express because it's all you're being soft, tough enough. We got to get this money. We got to secure the bag. We got to get these numbers, these analytics. But let's talk about the performance exhaustion that's tied into this.
Yeah, I think that when you think about the position that Black men have in society, and you think about all of the expectations that we are expected to achieve, and then you think about the amount of resources that are poured into us, it doesn't match up. It doesn't match up that I'm supposed to do all of these things. I'm supposed to be the provider, sometimes not just for my household, but for my
Mm-hmm.
family or my extended family. I'm supposed to be the provider for my friend group. You know, if there's this kind of this expectation that I should reach back for
Mm-hmm.
people that were in my community that weren't able to achieve the things that I achieved. I'm supposed to, have some kind of spiritual or religious freedom and independence and maturity. All of these things that I'm supposed to have, but then I don't have a lot of those resources that have been poured into me. So there's this assumption that I have to keep performing. And when I keep performing, the last thing I'm thinking about is mental health. The last thing that I'm thinking about is decompressing. All of those things really go out the window. I'm just performing and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
even thinking about how I feel. I'm not thinking about if I'm depressed. I'm not thinking about if I'm anxious. All I'm thinking about is what is the next thing I have to do? What's the next thing I have to achieve? And once I achieve that, I'm moving on to the next thing. I'm sometimes not even enjoying the real fruits of my labor.
So what happens to that? Because then we see the other end of it where you've pressed so hard, you've worked so hard, and this pressure is building, and you don't listen to your body, you don't listen to your spirit, your mind, you get sick.
Right.
Or you begin to have I call emotional breaks. Not that anything psychotic, but you're more impatient, you're more irritable, your sleep pattern may be off, or you're thinking about your project so much, you're up to 3 in the morning, then you're up again at 5. So you're going off 2 hours of sleep and having these 18-hour days, and then you're grabbing and getting food. You're not eating fruits and vegetables. You're not drinking a lot of water. So now you're even more irritable, or you could go into being angry because subconsciously you're kind of feeling resentful because you're doing all this by yourself, so to say, but you're not giving your mind or your body any reprieve, and you don't have an outlet. You don't have anybody that you can talk to as far as in your men's circle, because if you do, this is what we do. We're men. We go get it. We're hunters. We're hard. We're the producer. So then, who do you talk to? And you can't. So who do you talk to when you're having those moments? I guess is my question.
I think you don't talk to anybody. I think for a lot of us, we don't really talk to anybody because we don't have that person to talk to. So we
Mm,
kind of hold it in. We figure it out the best that we can. We do the best that we can, but ultimately we end up holding in a lot of those emotions. And one of the things that you said that I wanted to highlight is
mhm,
that stress can really wear down on the body. So a lot of times when I'm seeing clients, one of the first things that I'm going to do is I want to rule out if those presenting problems are medical issues or if they're
mhm,
mental health issues. And a lot of times, things that look like medical issues can really present as mental health issues. So, someone could come with things like headaches, or someone can have shoulder pain, or someone can have stomach aches. And those may be things that a person can think has a medical origin, but really it's mental health. The body will let you know when you can't take on more, or when you take on too much, or when you need to rest. And
mhm,
oftentimes we don't know that until we have a negative episode or we have some kind of medical intervention that lets us know I need more sleep. I need more rest. I need more vacations. I need more pro social outlets that don't involve making money or don't involve work or don't involve some kind of professional identity. I just need to do things that are fun. And we oftentimes don't pay attention to those signals until it's too late or until something has happened that's really gotten our attention.
wow. I watched a reel, and I think it was on TikTok. And his young brother, he was talking, and he said he was going through a period of time where he was just going through it, and he said all I wanted was a hug.
Mm.
And he said because of culturally, as far as how our community, at least for most Black men, is set up, just getting a hug, it's like, man, what you doing, dog? With your guy friends. And he said he was even willing to go to a random church that he didn't even know just because he wanted a hug. And he said he was going through it so bad. He said if somebody had hugged him, he would have broken down.
Oh, wow.
He said he said all I wanted was a hug. But because the way his community and environment was set up in that moment, whatever was going through in his life, he said to get me through that moment, he said all I wanted was, and you could just see the sincerity and the sobriety in his face. He was like, and he was just talking about how Black men sometimes it's not about talking it out, just a hug, just,
Mm.
and I was like, wow.
Yeah, I think when we think about safety, so when we take the word safety at its root and we
Hmm.
think about what does it mean to be safe, who determines safety, who enhances safety, who takes safety away, a lot of times safety can come from within at its root. So we are kind of in charge of our safety when we think about it in a literal sense. But then there's the emotional safety. And emotional safety isn't that safety in terms of I can't lock my front door and say, okay, now I feel emotionally safe. I may feel physically safe, but that emotional safety is from within. And I think that sometimes when you're in a space where you're going through a lot, you feel like nobody really understands what you're going through. When someone does even a gesture like putting your hand on someone's shoulder, that creates emotional safety. That makes me feel safe in that moment because I may not feel safe. I may not know what's next or what's going to happen. So I definitely not, I will be honest, physical touch is not high on my totem pole, so we all got different things. I'm definitely more verbal. I like to hear it. I like to hear um I like words of affirmation. I like to hear that I'm doing a good job if I feel like I'm doing a good job. But there are moments where I can definitely see where physical touch would make me feel safe in that instance, just like how I feel safe when my doors are locked. That makes me
Hmm.
feel safe. Even though there may be nobody that ever tries to open my door against my will, but the fact that it's locked, it makes me feel safe. I think that that same analogy can be applied to when you are getting that hug or you are getting that physical touch, that it creates a sense of safety that you didn't have. And that now that I have that safety, I can kind of express how I really feel or I can let out my emotions.
That's good. So tying in as we get closer to this, it goes fast. As we get closer to the end of the conversation, the impact of stress on our brothers. What is that looking like when it goes unchecked? And we're looking at the longevity of unchecked stress.
Yeah, so stress weighs down on the body, just like how I talked about, not just your mental health, but just your physical body. So I think when somebody has dealt with a stressful situation, and when we think about what stress really is, that's going to be different for different people. So I
Hmm.
could get evicted tomorrow, and that may be something that's very normal for my community. That may be a
Right.
normal experience. It may be something that I don't like, but it doesn't cause me as much distress because it just is part of what I've had to deal with, or it's part of something that I'm desensitized to. Another person could go through the same exact thing and it could be life changing. They could have severe mental health implications. They can become depressed. They can develop other issues just because of this one incident. So when we think about what stress is, we have to also realize that it's very much individualized. Each individual is going to apply stress differently. How that impacts a person is going to depend from person to person. For some people, you can look at some unhealthy defense mechanisms. So, when we think about defense mechanisms, we're talking about kind of our natural reaction to a situation that we perceive is going to threaten us. So, We may be more jealous, we may be more temperamental, we may have some of these traits that we kind of exhibit to protect ourselves. When we've gone through stressful things, we kind of want to protect ourselves. We want to either stop the stress or stop whatever triggered it, so we can do some of these things, some of these maladaptive behaviors, some of these defense mechanisms that can really be unhealthy, especially for our relationships. So, not just us, but the people around us that we love and care about, they really get some of the negative impacts of stress that's just building up. And it's getting to the point where at some point that stress has to be released. We're not just going to stay stressed out without figuring out some way to cope with it. That's human behavior. Everybody's going to find a coping mechanism. What does that coping mechanism look like? Substance abuse. It could be sexual abuse, both as a victim and as a perpetrator. It could be things like PTSD. So when you're thinking about more on the mental health side, like now you have a mental health issue going on. It
Mm-hmm.
could be abuse, physical abuse. All of these things can be things that we now do to release the stress because we don't know what else to do with that stress. We've tried to figure it out on our own. It wasn't effective. So now I'm just doing things that may make me feel good in an instance or may not, but I'm doing things that it's just my reaction to how I decompress.
That's really good. You gave us a lot there, and I definitely want to dig into that deeper when I bring you back as far as the coping mechanisms because we see that, and then we label um, behaviors, not thinking or knowing it's really tied into something much deeper. So, with that being said, before we kind of wrap things up, Antoine, do you have any takeaways or nuggets that you would like to give us as we begin to wrap up this conversation? Then also where people can contact you on social media, or if they would like to reach you to maybe schedule something and talk to you some about some things offline, where they can contact you offline as well.
Yeah, I think that my biggest takeaway would be that our when we think about even going along with stress and some of the other things that we've talked about, that our bodies will naturally tell us when we've had too much or when we
Mhm.
can't keep going on or when we need to take a break. Just listen to those signs. Especially for black men and black brothers, we're not invincible and we shouldn't have to be. It's okay to say, I think a lot of times when you ask people, are you okay? How often, especially as a black male, do you feel comfortable saying no? That's not something that we really celebrate. We don't celebrate somebody that can say no if they're asked if they're okay. We got to start normalizing those kind of responses and we got to start normalizing those emotions because if I ask you if you're okay, I'm like, you're okay, right? I almost don't even want to hear you say that you're not okay. And if you do say that you're not okay, what is my follow up going to be? Is it going to make you feel safe? Is it going to make you feel more stressed out? So, really, just kind of being aware of how we're doing and when our body is signaling that we're not doing well, just listening to that signal and really creating a healthy plan of how we can get back on track.
That's good. A lot of times we hear the phrase, "How you doing?" Especially in the South. I'm blessed and highly favored, or I'm good, And so I've learned more to say, "Hey, are you feeling all right?" Because when you say that versus how you're doing, the response it switches up. So I was in the grocery store today, on my lunch break, and there was a young brother. He came to check me out, and I could just read his whole purportment, and I was like, "Oh, courtesy, like, oh, hey, how you doing today?" And then he's like, "I'm good." And I was like, "Oh, really? You okay? Like, how are you doing?" And we began to talk, but I created a space where he felt comfortable. So we kind of chatted as he was checking me out, and I gave him some words of encouragement. And he goes, "Wow, I needed that." And I thought, how many people see other men and don't take the time to say, "No, like, really, how are you feeling? Like, for real." I think
And
that can
think
be a great
about
segue.
No, I totally agree. And think about how many other people are in that young male's life that he interact with daily or weekly that haven't poured into him what you were able to pour into him as a stranger? Like, imagine how many people may have been feeling something that they have not been able to express to somebody because nobody has asked, nobody has checked in.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
that's really good. I definitely want to bring you back to continue this conversation, um, and go deeper into this, just because I just love your perspective. I think you're so bright and so intelligent. You always bring so much, so it's always a joy to have you here. And just we'll do a quick debrief after the show. But for those, if you're just tuning in, um, I've been sitting here talking with Antwan Aiken. We had a great conversation here on the Speaker Podcast. If you missed this episode, no worries. The replay will be available on Facebook and YouTube, and then later on, the audio version will be available on various streaming platforms. With that being said, this is your girl Camille Essick. I'm host of the Speaker Podcast. This is the podcast where innovators and creators connect. Good night, y'all.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.